Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 41st monthly Zoom presentation. We are now into our fourth year with no end in sight. My name is Brian Gallagher, and I'm the Vice President of the Society for Commercial Archaeology. I will be your host tonight. Welcome to all our guests and any new people we have with us tonight, and particularly anyone with the Friends of the Historic Columbia River Highway. We're happy you took the time out of your summer evening to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anybody watching the recording of this episode of the SCA's monthly presentations who is not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost exclusively from our membership. Just visit our website at www.sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's speaker. Bob Hadlow is going to take us on a ride down the Columbia River Highway, America's first highway. This route was constructed from 1913 to 1922 east of Portland, Oregon, along the south shore of the Columbia River. In nearly 80 miles, it offered motorists magnificent views of a wonderful collection of waterfalls and many scenic vistas. The road continued west to the Oregon coast and east toward the fertile fields of eastern Oregon. Interstate 84 eventually bypassed the historic highway, but the older route, now known as the historic Columbia River Highway, offers travel at a leisurely pace without any rush. Abandoned segments form the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. Bob is the senior historian with the Oregon Department of Transportation and a member of the SCA. He prepared a National Historic Landmark nomination for the Columbia River Highway Historic District, and it was designated in 2000. The Oregon State University Press published his book-length biography of Condi B. McCullough in 2001, titled Elegant Arches, Soaring Spans, C.B. McCullough, Oregon's Master Bridge Builder. When he's not pursuing transportation history, you might see him driving his 1939 Buick Roadmaster on the back roads around Portland. And with that introduction, Bob, will you please unmute yourself and start the presentation? Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Let me share the screen here. Screen one.
Alex,
it looks like screen one has popped up, right?
Yeah, it's right there. Looks perfect.
Looks great. Well, thanks, Brian, for the introduction. You know, when we received the NHL designation for the Columbia River Highway Historic District in 2000, Bert Badeau, who was one of the editors of the SCA Journal, asked me to write an article on that, and it was published in 2000. And then he twisted my arm, and I edited the journal for 4 years, and it was interesting. I'd never done anything like that before, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And so there is an article that's 23 years old, and a lot has happened in 23 years. So I'm glad to be able to connect with folks today. So we'll start out here. I have quite a few slides in this deck, but I don't spend much time on each one. So this is the title slide. We have John B. Yon, who was a retired lumberman and was what you consider today the construction project manager for the sections of the highway in Multnomah County. He took it upon himself for $1 a year to work with the county to build the highway. And here he is showing it off to folks in 1916. Really proud of what happened there. So that's what this photo is. Well, this pops up later on in the talk. But we need to start somewhere else. Let's back up a bit. To 1908, the first International Road Congress in Paris. And I was lucky enough to go to the 23rd Road Congress. They changed the name in 2007 to make it made its second appearance after 99 years in Paris. And they had a day-long session on the history of roads. And I had a 15-minute slot. There were 16 of us during the day to talk about historic roads, and 3 of us from the United States. And I talked about our Columbia River Highway. Sam Hill was so jacked up about things and went to this conference and then toured some roads around Western Europe and came back and said, this is what I want to build in the Columbia River. So here we have Sam Hill. Sam Hill, here's 3 men who traveled by boat. They spent probably 6 weeks abroad. make it worth it, and went to the Congress in 1908. You have Reginald Thompson and Samuel Hill, and Samuel Lancaster. Thompson is part of this group because he was the public works director for the city of Seattle. And Hill was really involved in good roads in the state of Washington from the 1890s. Sam Hill was actually a railroad engineer for his father-in-law, James J. Hill, the railroad baron from St. Paul, Minnesota. He was out west working with on his father's lines, and then he had his own economic interests, and one of those was good roads. And the third man on the right there on this photo on the left is Sam Lancaster. He was a engineer with the Federal Office of Road Inquiries, later the Bureau of Public Roads, and today the Federal Highway Administration. And he was out west, and the three of them really hit it off well. Hill was the promoter, and Thompson was the city of Seattle Public Works director and interested in roads, and then Lancaster could make things happen. The other photo surfaced recently of the three of them on a ship, and I'm not sure what the sequence is here because Thompson has a full beard in the picture on the right, and he doesn't on the one on the left. But anyway, that was part of the same trip. And they had a great time there, not just in Paris, but they went to see a guy named Purnell Hooley in the British Isles. And Hooley was the one who developed tar macadam, which is a road surfacing material, essentially asphaltic concrete or asphalt we know today. There are various versions of this, but and he had a patent on it from early part of the 20th century. And they went to visit him, and they traveled around and saw many roads on the continent, including the Oxenstrasse in Switzerland, which was along the shores of Lake Lucerne from 1865. It was a carriage road, and it had a magnificent tunnel with 3 windows. And what is that? Bergenstock is seen in the background there. So one of the windows frames the mountain. And what's interesting is we have little masonry walls and the tunnels with windows, and we'll see this pop up, interestingly enough, in Oregon, in the early part of the 20th century. So here's the Columbia River Gorge east of Portland. It's really delightful. I was out there yesterday, actually, with a group of engineering geologists at Vista House, which we'll get to in a bit, to talk about the gorge and to talk about the road and its significance. And they were interested in the gorge for its geology, but appreciated the road and the challenges in building it. So Lancaster was working. The connection with Lancaster and Thompson is that the city of Seattle was getting ready for the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition of 1909, and they had the Olmsteds out and had developed a system of parks for Seattle, and that included the Lake Washington Boulevard. Lancaster made it happen, and this was the first real example of his out west. He ended up leaving the federal service and worked out here as a consultant for the rest of his life. And this is in 1908, building the Lake Washington Boulevard with sweeping curves and gentle grades, and there were some bridges here and there, and it was really something. But very shortly, Hill sent him up to Hill's ranch, 100 miles east of Portland on the Washington side of the river. It's what we call the Mary Hill Ranch today, named after Hill's daughter, Mary Hill. He employed Lancaster out there to develop good roads and show what to do and what not to do. And they looked at grades and curves and guard rocks and pavement. And here's an early construction wagon that Lancaster developed and patented. It's a steel wagon with a belly dump, like the big construction wagons or trucks we see today, but this is horse drawn. And they use this all the time to move aggregate around and asphalt and everything they did to build the roads. But here's another portion of one of the roads. This is a section that has loops. And the point here is that he could maintain gentle grades, but had the so-called developed distance. The road had to go back and forth on itself rather than in a straight line down a steep hillside, maybe down that little gulch there. But this was a way of maintaining gentle grades, and it was curvilinear. And this section is still extant today. Some parts of the loops have been lost. This section is still here today, and it's enjoyed by auto enthusiasts once in a while, but mostly bikes and peds. Here we have Hill showing off loops, the roads out there in 1912 to a bunch of Hood River County, Oregon officials. I don't know who they are. The man in the very back center with the big cowboy hat is Sam Hill. And he had a big personality and was a great persuader, and was able to get a group of people around him to support his interests. Here's a great photo that actually Lancaster shot. It's very faint in the far way back there, but you see Mount Hood and outlining Mount Hood, just maybe straight up from the man's head up towards the top of the photo. But this is, but you see how idyllic this is. A little community of Columbus down below with the vegetation. There's a lot of peach orchards down there, but this was part of the experience. So in some ways, the road engineers were directing the driving experience for the folks on the road. Well, Hill brought more people up, and his political fortunes in Washington went sour, and he was always planning to build this road as part of a network of Washington roads. And he looked towards Oregon to build a road up the Oregon side of the Columbia River, which is the south shore rather than the north shore. It's the river divide is the dividing line between the states for the lower reaches of the Columbia from Wallowa Gap to the mouth. So anyway, of course, Hill's a river man, and he has special train from Portland come up the gorge, and here they are inspecting something along the way. But this is the entire Oregon State Legislature, and they drove up to Mary Hill on this blustery February day and saw the great roads that Lancaster had built, and also roads that one should not build. It was a lesson for them, and he had scrapbooks and photos and everything for them to look at and take back. First thing they did when they got back to Salem, I think, was created the Oregon State Highway Commission in February of 1913, which consisted of the governor and the state secretary of state and the state treasurer. They had no money, but their main role was to promote roads at a state level. Counties still held on to they held on tightly to building roads. That was their thing, but they had to provide funding for it too. So Hill needed to get Multnomah County behind him to support at least the Multnomah County portion of the road, which goes east to Portland, and then the road would go into Hood River County and then Wasco County out towards the Dalles. So he brought the commissioners and others out here to Chanticleer Point, and Mrs. Henderson, Margaret Henderson, had this restaurant. It was about as far east as one could drive in Multnomah County, and she offered country dinners of chicken and venison and trout and salmon, and no alcohol there. She didn't want people to drive after they've been drinking. And this was during, well, Prohibition hadn't started yet, but where things are going to get going. There was that interest at the time, but Hill was able to make the pitch and sold it to the county commission. And we should know it. Well, this is the view that you would get from Chanticleer. I should have mentioned that, without Vista House there. So it was a beautiful place to sit and look out at the gorge, and it was enchanting for people. And the thought of having a road through there that you could drive and see the gorge and see the waterfalls, and it was something to behold. So the road would go from Troutdale essentially to the Dalles, and this is Troutdale's about 15 miles east of Portland. And it would follow the cliffs along the south shore of the Columbia River to Cascade Locks and on the Hood River, and then along to the Dalles, and it would continue east from there. But this was the first part of it, and the road would also continue west to the Oregon coast. But the part that Hill was interested in was here in the heart of the gorge. And he did get the commissioners to vote to appropriate money for the road, and we don't have any groundbreaking photos of construction on the highway. Surveying started in September, and construction started in October 1913, so it was pretty fast. We didn't have environmental impact statements and things like that to worry about. What was interesting too was almost all folks were willing to give right away to the county in Multnomah County to build a highway. So the new Oregon State Highway Commission's motto at the time was "Get Oregon out of the mud," and Hill was right in the thick of that. And like I said, we don't have photos of the groundbreaking for the Columbia River Highway, but Hill was also interested in the Pacific Highway, which would run from the Columbia River south down through the Willamette Valley and down through the Rogue Valley and on to the Siskiyou Summit and down into California, essentially the route of Interstate 5 today. But so we do have a photo of Sam Hill with a shovel and Governor Oswald West looking on there, and there's the first scoop of dirt for the construction of the Pacific Highway. And interestingly enough, that shovel still exists. It's out at the Maryhill Museum, which is on Hill's land out there where he took to the legislature. And I saw the shovel there, and I told the curator, I said, you know, I have a photograph showing that. I mean, they have not seen the photo, so we were able to connect them with a photo from the ODOT collection to go in the case with the shovel. So the shovel has a lot of writing on it talking about the event in 1913. So Lancaster developed grade and curve standards. There are two important takeaways here. This road was built to high engineering standards, and it was sensitive to the natural landscape. So we have a maximum of 5% grade, minimum 200-foot turning radius on curves. The roadway width would be 24 feet, ideally, with an 18-foot travel way. There was no center line in those days, so it's a total of 18 feet, and then 2 3-foot shoulders. And the other part was it would be sensitive to the landscape, the natural landscape. It would be continuation of the landscape. Human-made masonry that would complement the natural masonry that was there. So here's a good photo of the Rowena loops. This somewhat looks like the loops we saw at Maryhill, but it's more dramatic, I think. The gorge is bookended by Crown Point and Rowena Crest. This is Rowena Crest on the eastern part of the section of highway, and one has to go from Rowena Crest down to river level as you head into the Dalles, which is about 80 miles east of Portland, 88 miles east of Portland. So anyway, it's really dramatic to see these loops. And all the color here, and notice the vegetation is sparse and low level and quite different from what you see in the western part of the gorge. But here we have masonry guard walls too, and you know, they're covered with moss, and they look like they've been there forever, and they have been. They've been there since 1913. And then there were some trails too that would take people down to some of the waterfalls. This is Shepherd's Dell, a pedestrian trail. It comes down off of the end of the Shepherd's Dell Bridge. Still there, still wonderful today. And we have other trails at Waukena Falls and other locations. These short trails that are there to get you to a designated spot. So one of Lancaster's students, actually the one who designed the Mitchell Point Tunnel that we'll see, said this: the grades, curvature, distance, and even expense were sacrificed to reach some scenic vista or to develop a particularly interesting point. All the natural beauty spots were fixed as control points and the location adjusted to include them. Although the highway would have a commercial value in connecting the coast country with the eastern areas, no consideration was given the commercial or the scenic requirements. The one prevailing idea in the location and construction was to make this highway a great scenic boulevard, surpassing all other highways of the world. Now, Lancaster called it America's Great Highway, and journalists called it the King of Roads. And I see it as the first scenic highway, and that was the thesis. That was the point we made with the National Historic Landmark nomination. It's the first highway, in a sense, the first scenic highway in the United States. So, and one might say it's the first highway too. It's America's Great Highway. So we have some wonderful bridges on this road, and many of them are one of a kind. And the State Highway Commission, although they had no money to build roads, they had some engineers who could design bridges and offer free bridge design to counties. And that was on the books until just recently, I think, here in Oregon generally. So it went on, that opportunity went on for a long time. So we had a couple of hotshot engineers, Carl Billner and Louis Metzger. And Billner came from Sweden, born and educated there, and came to the States and designed this very lightweight arched truss on a location that had bad foundations. You want a lightweight bridge. Here at Shepherd's Dell, we have a wonderful structure that's more traditional arch. It's anchored into the outcroppings there. And this one pops up in a lot of photos. We see a lot of deck photos. But there's someone standing there taking a photo from the parapet rail. This is just a wonderful shot. I do want to put a shout out to a good close friend, David Sell. He's he lives in the Portland area. He's an avid postcard collector and a real fan of the historic Columbia River Highway. And he's given us the opportunity to use images from his collection of historic postcards and photographs. So we'll see several of them in this slide deck. So here's another structure. This is a viaduct. We have two of these near Multnomah Falls. They're just a bridge with many legs that doesn't go over water. It goes over land, so it's a viaduct rather than a bridge. But it's a reinforced concrete deck or bridge or viaduct with a really nice, elegant railings on the riverside. The other side has a retaining wall, and it's built the way it is because there's a railroad right down below, and there wasn't a lot of room to put a road in there, and it rides up the hillside a bit, and but that offers some opportunity to be above the railroad and get some great views of the river. Another one is the Moffat Creek Bridge, and this is actually Louis Metzger's bridge. He was a Cornell graduate and was from out west, I believe, and then landed with this highway commission department for a few years and designed this very shallow arch. It's been bypassed for decades, and we were able to rehabilitate it. Didn't take much railing really replacement to make it part of our historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. There you see Beacon Rock in the background. Beacon Rock pops up in many of these photos, and it was a reference point in the Columbia River Gorge. Conde McCullough was the state bridge engineer from 1919 to 1937, and this is the early bridge in his body of work. He was really a fan of reinforced concrete arch bridges. This is out over Dry Canyon Creek. We sometimes say we should just call it Dry Canyon because I don't believe there's any creek there, but he built two of these out in this part of the highway there, and one in the city of Mosier. And this one is out very rural, out in the middle of nowhere, lots of rattlesnakes, but it just jumps across that gorge. But it has some elegant architectural elements. McCullough was a fan of classic details, and we have nice Roman arches there on the span of columns. There's the segmental arches in the railings on the sidewalk, and then there's some other elements there. And he was a fan of pebble dashing some of the piers are pebble dashed, so the surface is rough to contrast with the smooth surfaces on the arch and on the railings. Then we have some tunnels too, and this is the tunnel, the Mitchell Point Tunnel, the tunnel of many vistas, and it has 5 windows instead of 3 that you see on the tunnel on the Oxenstrasse. So I guess they won up the Swiss with this tunnel. When John Arthur Elliott designed it, the windows are clustered with a single window on each end and a group of 3 in the middle. There's a bit of a curve in his tunnel so that one could see the gorge as you drove through. So, he functioned as the engineer who designed the tunnel, but also the director of the virtual experience, the dynamic experience of driving in this segment of the Columbia River Gorge. We figured out that the car there is that's a State Highway Commission employee. Oregon DMV records going back to 1911 are online, and I ran the license plate number and it pops up as a State Highway Commission car. I can't remember what brand it is now, but anyway, it dates from about 1920. So great photo. And then we have the Mosier Twin Tunnels. These are farther east of the city of The Dalles in Wasco County. And this is a bit odd looking. The tunnel, these pictures, the one on the left, you're looking east through the shorter of the 2 tunnels towards the longer tunnel. And then the photograph on the right, you're looking west from the longer tunnel through the shorter tunnel. And the designers at the time, like this one and Mitchell Point, probably played off some of the ideas of Andrew Jackson Downing in terms of landscape architecture, that they should be cave-like to really make them look like they're part of nature. And that's great, but this rock at Mosier is pretty fractured and tended to fall down and cause problems. It made it unsafe for drivers. So the state lined the tunnels with timber, portions of the long tunnel, the ends of it with timber, and the short tunnel completely with timber, and then they put mortared masonry portals on there. So we do some changes, but and I didn't stop all the rockfall. There's still rockfall issues to address west of the tunnels, but it made the tunnels themselves safer. And they integrated them as best they could with human-made masonry. I have a couple of photos here. People were so excited about this highway, 1915, that it got kind of a soft opening in 1915. The road in Multnomah County hadn't been paved yet with asphalt, or what we call asphalt with Warrenite, which is a patented asphalted concrete pavement. But people were so enthusiastic. We can tell that because roadway here isn't paved. It's a macadam road, which is a particular type of very hard-wearing road, but it doesn't happen to have asphalt on top. But it's a good hard-wearing road. But these photos are great. There's two of these that Dave has in his collection, and we still don't know which, maybe 1916 before they paved. But what's interesting is how the people are dressed, and they're all here. The group was focused on this band, and it's either a fire department band or a police band. Maybe, I don't think it's Salvation Army. It could be one of those, but some organization with a band, and they're in uniform and playing. And this is at Crown Point, and that place that location you can see from Chanticleer Inn. But a colleague of mine, Kristen, says, I like looking at, really zooming in on folks and looking at the kids here. And these kids are really taken by this band for some reason. And then you have the folks there's the guy smoking the cigar and the guy with the boater hat, the pipe, and they're all dressed. These cars are open cars. And this must have been, I suspect, a spring day. It looks a bit foggy out there. And so if we go to this next photo, here's just some more of these people. And we did a close up here, and these folks look like they're just out there to have fun and getting together. And but it was a big event just to go out there. And I say this must have been opening day for the season. Well, the road was finally paved in Multnomah County in 1916, and the county decided to have a celebration on June 7th, and it was part of the Rose Festival. Portland has a Rose Festival that runs most of the summer and has events. And this was early in the summer, probably one of the kickoff events, and they had a rose court with the Queen and Queen and her court, and then there was a king for a few years. But the Queen Harriet, I guess, I believe it was Queen Harriet this time, was there, and they had an event at Multnomah Falls, and there was all sorts of things going on, and people were encouraged to go there. But few people had automobiles. We see a photograph here with cars in the parking lot. But most of them came out on special trains. The railroad right there, and they came out on special trains from Portland Union Station. So that's interesting. Very enthusiastic about the road, but they couldn't afford an automobile. Automobiles were still pretty expensive at the time. But you can see folks filling up there in the forecourt there, and then on the stage to the right there we have who knows what's going on at this point. But it was an event that ran for the earlier part of the day, and then many of the people went back up to Crown Point because it was the kickoff for the construction of the Vista House. And we have the photo there of everybody standing around, and then there's a photo. There was a 48 gun salute. At the time, there were 48 states in the Union, so we have 48 gun salute. And Henry Pittock, the publisher of the Oregonian, was the chair of the Vista House Association, and he was involved there. He's standing there in the middle with a white suit on in the photograph on the left. And in any case, it was a big deal. So this was the second part of that all-day celebration for the Columbia River Highway. And the Vista House, here we see it again. There's Crown Point in 1916 with the viaduct, and it circles it. And then 1918, in May of 1918, Vista House was dedicated. It's interesting that it has several functions. One people always remember is that it has good, clean bathrooms. Well, that was important in 1918, and it was part of the progressive era. Public health was a big deal, and it had the most advanced in terms of bathrooms. Even made Valve World, which was a trade publication for folks who do plumbing, and it originally had crane sinks and crane grand toilets and marble with partitions between in the stalls and marble walls, marble everywhere. This was down in the basement of Vista House. And then upstairs, it's really more important as a memorial to the pioneers of Oregon. Now, folks have to realize that the Oregon pioneers kind of started in the 1840s and 1850s. There was a big push for people to come out west from when they started in Missouri. I guess that was the jump-on point for the Oregon Trail. Come out 2,000 miles with the wagon and oxen, and then file for a donation land claim starting in 1850. But by the teens, there were few pioneers left, and I believe it was a point. It was the last opportunity to honor the Oregon pioneers. So the gallery, the main part of the building, the rotunda, is there and is decorated to honor Oregon's history and Oregon's pioneers, and so that's why it's important. Edgar Lazarus, a local architect, designed the building in the Jugendstil or German Art Nouveau style of architecture. It has lots of it's a concrete building with a masonry veneer and has a tile roof and lots of marble inside and Casota stone. We'll see a couple of photos of it later. So the highways construction, though, you need to have somebody who's a good person that managing construction crews. And John B. Yon was the one who made his money cutting timber in Columbia County west of Portland, and made a pile of money and became a capitalist. He built Portland's first skyscraper, a 13-story building clad in white terracotta. It's still there today. It's not the tallest building by any means today. The building's over 40 stories downtown, but at that time it was something else. It's just structured steel building, steel and concrete building. But he was really taken by roads, and he got involved with Hill's Inner Circle and petitioned the county to be the roadmaster, and he managed the construction of this highway and probably some other roads. He could manage men. And that is what I mean by that is work crews of men out there cutting wood, cutting timber, and he could manage construction crews, and that was important, and could make some on-the-spot decisions based on Lancaster's plans for the road. And so here he is in his field clothes, probably with the same type of clothes he wore when he was working in timber. But here he is again. Here he is showing it off in 1916. So there's his 1915 Franklin, which was an air-cooled car, and manufacturers are trying everything. We have steam-powered automobiles, we have electric automobiles, we have gas internal combustion automobiles. Some of them are cooled by water, radiators, and some are cooled by air. This is a Franklin air-cooled automobile, and Franklins were around into the 1930s. Although they changed their front end to look like they had radiators because it was something people were accustomed to see. And maybe it was a sales thing, but they were truly air-cooled. So the group here is some people from the Vanderbilt family and some folks associated with the Northern Pacific Railroad in Portland. And the woman towards the left there, second from the left, is holding what looks like a big football or a watermelon. It's actually a ceramic piece of, we think, or a silver piece of a potato. And the Northern Pacific was the route of the great big baked potato. And you see these online, and they actually have a pat of butter. It looks like a pat of butter. There's a little yellow piece in the middle square in the middle of melting. And I think what it comes down to is the Northern Pacific prided itself on shopping locally along its routes. And the potatoes were part of that. So I'm not sure why she's showing it off here, but she is. but Jan is having a lot of fun showing off the road. He made at least a second one of these trips that we know of with F.W. Woolworth himself, Mr. Woolworth, and his entourage. Same playbill, 3 cars, the Woolworths and some other folks. And I'm not sure how far east they went, but they did travel in the Multnomah County section. And then there are also just enthusiasts. Here's a fountain at Waukena Falls that the local Rotary Club had commissioned and installed there. And the basin there's the basin, and there's the little metal things around the rim that squirt water, and then water comes out of the hub on that cog. And that's the Rotary symbol. And on the front here it says Portland Rotary Club 1916. And on the back side it says, "He profits most who serves best. He profits most who serves best." So it was a big deal. And from what I've heard is the Portland Rotary predates the International by a few years. So it was early, and they'd only been around a couple of years when this event happened. But we have Simon Benson on the left. He was another lumber baron who made a lot of money and was another supporter of the highway. And he owned and operated the Benson Hotel in downtown Portland, which is still there. The man next to him was George Baker, who was a city commissioner at the time, but became the mayor in 1917, and was the longest serving mayor, serving until 1933. And if there's a photo of a group in Portland, you're going to see George Baker will be in it. And that's just the way it was. I'd like to be photographed, I guess. The little girl on the rotary is a daughter of a local doctor. He probably is the man standing behind the two men on the right side who has red hair also. She has red hair, he has red hair. The man between them who's balding is Sam Lancaster, our engineer again. I can't remember the name of the next guy, but the guy on the far right with the hat is Oregon Governor James Whitcomb, who was a real supporter of road construction. He came after Oswald West, who showed up in that photo of the Pacific Highway, and they were both real enthusiasts of good roads. And you couldn't have had this road and others and the whole program without Governor West and Governor Whitcomb. So who drove this road? People who drove this road were people who had money and could afford these big cars at $5,000 a piece. That's a lot of money at any time, but in those days it was unapproachable for most. But very early on, Henry Ford was Model T, which he started producing in 1908, but went into mass production in 1913, made automobiles affordable, and then more people bought them, and then there were other manufacturers too that followed suit. So we have a lot of folks who are interested in the road. And here in Oregon, when you came to Oregon, you saw these big signs at the borders. You must register your car. All motor vehicles from other states must be registered. And this was not just Oregon, I think other states did this too. And you were issued a permit. And then here we have maximum speeds and a lot of courtesies, traffic regulations, drive cautiously and keep to the right. So, but they were ready for tourists. And the State Highway Commission got involved in this too. By the 1930s, they had a travel department, and they produced ads like this that probably appeared on the back page of National Geographic. And they produced movies that they sent out all around the country, probably the world, that you might see at Lions Club luncheons and Kiwanis Club luncheons, Rotary Club luncheons, maybe your local church in the church basement after service. So it was a way of promoting Oregon, and come visit Oregon. It's only 40 hours to drive from Chicago to Oregon, and it only costs $35 in gas. So why not go? So the state was ready for folks, and here we are about 145 miles east of Portland, and we have a junction here with lots of cities and arrows and route shields, and this is at Arlington, and we're seeing State Highway 19 going up to Condon, and then the US 30. So things have changed here from the teens. So if you're in Portland, you might go out. See if you're in Portland, want to go out on the highway for the day. You probably stop by a gas station. This I think is one of the Texaco stations on the east side of Portland. There's one just like this on northeast Gleason Street. I don't believe or Gleason Street, but I'm not sure if it's this one. But it's the same design. And this is the Texaco company, which is Texaco. The Texas company, which is Texaco. And this photo appears to be a promo for Chevrolet cars, because you can see hubcaps on these two cars from about 1930. Or you might stay in an auto camp on the east side of town. The top one there is Baseline Auto Camp. It's on Baseline Road or Stark Street east of town. That was one of the main routes out of Portland to get on the highway. And the Baseline, the survey point around Portland is the Willamette Stone, west of town. And the Baseline comes out of that. Everything north of the Baseline is the township north, and everything south is the township south. So that rotel's on township one north, and across the street where the photo is being taken is township one east, and then or one south, and then you have the ranges from there to townships and ranges and sections. And so Baseline was an important road, and they finally gave it a name, Stark Street, after one of Portland's pioneers and early founders. And then you have Camp Kellum over on 82nd Avenue and Powell Boulevard, and Violet Ray Gas. You see a lot of Violet Ray Gas around Portland. Interesting name. And then we have these little parks. This is west of Portland on the portion of the highway west of town. I never knew where this was, and I finally saw a label on this photo during the State Oregon Parks and Recreation celebration of their centennial last year. It's Bradley State Park or Bradley State Viewpoint, west of Portland. But these were very popular with these early drivers. You could stop and get some refreshments, maybe some gas, or have a picnic. In some of these places you could camp out. So, and then if you didn't have a car, well, you could take a bus. And here we have a photo of Multnomah Falls Lodge. And there's a bus there on the left, a small photo, but and the bus here on the right is just a different photo showing the same bus or one from the same period. But this was a company that catered to this location, or to the gorge, and has AAA approval, and it's a local company. So that was another way of getting out there, and we're looking at buses today as a way of getting people out to visit the gorge. And then there were a lot of I want to go through a series of roadside commercial architecture here. And some places to eat mostly, and some gas stations, but places mostly. This was a place near Troutdale. It started out as Tad's Smelt Shack, because there always runs a smelt on the Sandy River. And at one point, the shack had to go away because of a new road coming through here to connect with the Columbia River Highway. And it went down the highway a bit, a few miles, and they rebuilt it as Tad's Chicken and Dumplings. By then, they moved on to include other items in the menu, and Chicken and Dumplings was the one they were promoting. It's still here. Fortunately, it's just closed recently, and the hope is that it'll reopen again. Then we had Crown Point Chalet. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the Chanticleer Inn, didn't own it, and she went on to operate another place up the gorge that was only there a few months and burnt down. And then she opened up this place in 1915, just above Vista House at Crown Point, and she ran it for 13 years until she had health problems and had to give it up. But it offered country dinners again, and she kept a guest book, and it's amazing to look at the names. One of her grandchildren has the book, and he's researched people who signed the book, and it's movie stars and capitalists and elected people and just everybody else. But it's fun to see who was traveling on this road, and there are a lot of people traveling from far away. Then a few other places, the Moffitt's Villa at Ladderell seems like a place that when they needed a little more space, they just added on, and it doesn't all quite fit together, but that's what it was. And then Forest Hall, which is more of a revival house, plantation house, or whatever you want to call it. It seems a bit out of character here, but it is what it is, and it works. Moffitt's Villa went away when this highway was bypassed, and after World War II, business dried up for a lot of these places. Basically everybody was on the new highway down by the river, and it got closed up, and the state finally bought the property, and it's part of the park that surrounds Ladderell Falls. Forest Hall is still there; it's a private residence. There were a few other places here too. At Waukena, we had on the left there, we had a postcard shop and some restrooms early on. Those went away in the 1930s when there was a CCC project to develop. More fully develop that left side of the highway, as the falls is on the right side, with outdoor kitchens and bathrooms and picnic areas and all sorts of other things. So, and those are still there today. On the right here, we have Multnomah Lodge, not to be confused with Multnomah Falls Lodge. It's about 1,000 feet west of Waukena. You see that 1,000-foot thing there, and it didn't have a very long life either. I don't know what happened. They had chimney fires or what have you, and these places were wooden, and they burnt down, and all that's left is the chimney. And we saw some masonry walls recently after we had a fire here in the gorge. They rebuilt themselves, but these places, you're lucky if they were around as long as they were. The one that's lasted is Multnomah Falls Lodge, and it's been saved through at least 2 fires. One 25, 30 years ago, and then more recently with the Eagle Creek fire, with lots of fire folks there, and with all their equipment, saved the lodge. When this became part of the highway, the city of Portland owned and managed this location there, and I believe it's the Parks Department, mainly because there were no other local jurisdictions to manage these places. It's not part of the Forest Service. But the lodge is still there, and it's a wonderful place. When we had some others, here's Lindsay Creek Inn and the cabins. This is between Cascade Locks and Hood River. And it started out as a little one-story building, and then it grew and has 2 stories and a lot of masonry. I did the research on this photo, and it's a Nash car. They had interesting, good food. One of my colleagues says, trout ice cream, but it's really trout ice cream. And then there's a little cutout there. You've seen old magazines, call for Philip Morris. It's a Philip Morris cigarette ad, and it's I guess a bellhop, pretending it was a call for Philip Morris. And it was the ad. But anyway, this picture is very 30s. There was another place too called at Mitchell Point. This was originally a home for a family that from the east who came out west and had a home called the Little Boy Ranch for their son. The husband died, and the wife took the kids back to the east and sold the place, and it became really a roadhouse with some cottages there and a gas station, and then eventually a little motel. But it served food, and I suspect it took care of every need, alcohol and everything else. So it lasted until World War II, when the owner died, and lawyers liquidated the estate, and then it eventually became part of the state park system. The buildings are all torn down. There's a classic one here. This is Columbia Gorge Hotel in Hood River, on the west end of Hood River. Simon Benson, one of the folks in the earlier photos, owned the Benson Hotel, commissioned the local architect to design the Columbia Gorge Hotel in Hood River, and it was successful until the Great Depression hit, and then it became a rest home for a fraternal organization for many years, and then more recently, someone purchased it and turned it back into a hotel. It's a nice place. It has a great view of the river and the waterfall there, and it's part of the highway.
Oh, hey, Bob, just we're running a little bit close to the ending time. You got about 5 minutes left. You think you can wrap it up?
I will. That sounds fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Here's the state highway engineer at the time in 1921 in his 1921 Cadillac. They were good cars, and that's why he built a Cadillac. But he's out inspecting the roads that he's commissioned to be built. And the last one here is the Antler Auto Park in Hood River, and it was a gas station and fountain launches, and there was a camp, auto camp behind it. Today the building is still there, but it's a tattoo parlor and a cannabis shop, but it's still there. And there are a few more out farther east. These buildings, these are great photos. This one's boarded up today. This one, it's a great, well-composed photo, and the buildings are all gone. So we've had traffic jams on this highway for a long time. It's idyllic in the early days, not so much in the 30s, and not so much here at all. Big traffic jam, something happened. Mitchell Point with the photo opportunity is not going to happen with the tanker trucks, and then there are accidents. So the push was then to build a water level route, which became Interstate 84. Construction started in 1948, completed in 1970. And but part of that caused some destruction of the historic highway in the middle of the gorge. And you see on this photo here, drivable sections on the west end and the east end, but a lot of nothing in the middle. And ODOT spent the last 30 years reconnecting all that for bike pedestrian facilities, and rebuilding some masonry walls, rebuilding parapets on bridges. Here's a section of Hood River to Mosier, where we uncovered the tunnel that had been there for years and had been abandoned. It's been rehabilitated and opened since 2000. Vista House got a big rehabilitation. And Oneonta Tunnel, also another tunnel. We've been pushing hard for the last, since 2010. This was a goal of 2016 to have all this completed. It's not all completed, but most of it is between Cascade Locks and Hood River. And the big push is to open a new Mitchell Point tunnel, and it's been bored, and they're working on the lining right now, and it will open in 2024 and be a major part of the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail between Hanover and Mohier, or between Cascade Locks and the river. And with this, another mile and a half east of here, somebody will be able to get on their bike and ride from Portland to the Dalles and never get on Interstate 84. So we're getting pretty close with this tunnel, and can't wait to see it 2024. We revel. I'm gonna fast forward to the very end here. Say we revel, and we've had some great times with some celebrations. We had a centennial celebration at Waterfalls in 2016, and we continue to celebrate some of the accomplishments that we've made, not just ODOT, but ODOT and our partners on rehabilitating the historic Columbia River Highway and on building the connection segments for the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. So we made a selfie station using another photo from the series of the John Yon visit to the historic highway at Shepherd's Bridge, and then we used another postcard for the backdrop. And we have another postcard showing a scene from the eastern part of the Gorge, so you can pick and choose on what you want to see there. But anyway, it's a very popular way of celebrating the past and feeling like you're part of it here in a very quick way. So that's my talk tonight, and let's see what kind of questions we have.
Okay, Bob, that was absolutely amazing. The pictures are top notch and very clear and crisp, and none of this fuzzy sepia type stuff. I think in those days they were using better photographic equipment than what we have.
Well, a lot of those photos are contact prints with the postcards. So you know, you have they use big negatives, relatively speaking, you know, so they could produce them quickly. Just put the paper underneath the negative and turn the light on and off, and away you go.
So we have a lot of comments and questions here. So the first one was early in the presentation from Thomas Vandegrift. He says the Benson Hotel is a great hotel. Yeah, he stayed there, and he notes their great historical info in the stairwells. And of course, the SIA, our partner or our sister organization, Industrial Archaeology, had their conference in Portland last year and also stayed at the Benson Hotel. So, and I know people really enjoyed it. Now,
yeah,
Lisa,
we had the Historic Roads Conference there in 2004, and it was also lots of fun. Yeah.
Oh, great. Now, we have a question from Lisa Gratrick, and she says, fantastic photos, Bob. You mentioned that Hooley invented the use of macadam in the British Isles. Do you know if the composition of the material was similar to what we started seeing in Oregon, and was there still heavy shell content?
I'm not sure about the shell content, but I think what one sees, what's interesting is that I didn't show these photos, but Hill was so inspired by the International Road Congress that he set up his own in 1909 in Seattle, and Hooley was there. We have a photograph of all the folks standing out front. So he was in this inside group in a sense. I'm not sure. They probably did a lot of talking. Lancaster developed his own recipe for essentially asphalted concrete that he saw was well wearing and durable and didn't flake off. And it used long, skinny, sharp pieces of aggregate, and they warm up the aggregate and then warm up the asphaltum, and there was a key to temperatures and how things would cool down together. So I'm not sure about the shells, but you know, they were all fiddling around with recipes and what worked and what didn't work, and Lancaster documented that pretty well. They didn't use Lancaster's recipe for the highway. They used Warrenite, which was a patented asphaltic concrete pavement by the Warren brothers. And we found a brass plate in the Dalles just last year, because those used to be put in the Warrenite because it was proprietary. And there may have been others on the highway, but they've been taken out. We found one in the Dalles. It's still there. It's pretty worn. Yeah, somebody tipped us off on it, and we found it. Others may be out there. They got covered over by other layers. Yeah, Lisa, I don't know. You know, it's like concrete recipes. You know, everybody has their own.
Right. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Michael Paisno asks how much of the old road is left. Now, you did talk about this in your presentation, but maybe you could just recap. He says it looks like I-84 appears to dominate the stretch east of Portland.
Yeah, well, it's I-84 is down by the river, and the historic highway is mostly up in the hills. And the reason for that is the Oregon Rail and Navigation Company got there first in 1882 and put their line right down next to the river. So when Hill and his folks were looking at routes for the highway, they had to go up in the hills. It's really a cliff-faced road in many locations. It's on the east end and the west end, and then it drops down closer to the river between west of Cascade Locks all the way through the Hood River. And so we have, I don't have the numbers with me, 20 miles or so on the west end. It's 73 miles from Troutdale to the Dalles, and that's the segment we've focused on. That's the part in the National Register nomination. And of that, there's 54 extant miles, more or less, that are in the Register nomination. There's some areas that are just obliterated, they're completely gone between Cascade Locks and Hood River. And of that, 51 has enough integrity to be a landmark, part of the landmark district. So we have quite a bit on each end, and we've lost about 20 miles or so in the middle. And except in the city of Cascade Locks and the city of Hood River, they're city streets, but they're on the route. And Hood River in particular, it's like it hasn't changed. The part in the business district and the nearby residential district, but so our big challenge was we have all these little bits and pieces between Cascade Locks and Hood River that we've had to spend. That's challenging in terms of design work and money to reconnect all those. There's a lot of trail building that's going on there, including that Mitchell Point.
Dean Milano was one of our viewers tonight, is asked to me to unmute him, which I'm doing right now, and he's going to join us, I think, to ask a question or make a comment. Dean, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we sure can. Go ahead.
Okay. My wife and I, a wonderful presentation. I love these photos. They're really terrific. My wife and I drove the highway about 20 years ago. I went to the falls, all that. It was just spectacular. And there were places where I was marveling because you would look up the side of the mountain and you could see sections of the old highway that was obviously abandoned running way up there, and you couldn't get to them, but it was obviously the original highway. It was like cut into the side of the mountain. Are you aware of those pieces I'm talking about?
Well, were you on the interstate when you saw those?
No, we were on the road that goes to the waterfall, the huge waterfall there, right on that whole segment. That we drove the whole. We found that building you show that's on the point. I forgot the name of that beautiful old Art Deco building. We traveled the whole thing there. Yeah.
Well, there are some segments of the Sandy River to the Dalles wagon road that dates from the 1870s and on that are still extant out in the gorge, and we see some of those here and there. And it's not part of the historic highway. If you were on the historic highway and saw it, I would say that it's most likely parts of that wagon road
they had modern guardrails. I shouldn't say modern. I mean, they had concrete guardrails. It didn't look like a wagon road. It looked like a real 1920s or 30s highway up there, way up high on the side of the mountain. And there you could see where it was, but you knew that you couldn't get up there. It was closed off.
I'm not sure what that is then. It may be some type of private road or Forest Service road or utility road.
All right.
I couldn't tell you. If you knew the location, I could.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Dean. That's an interesting observation. Bob, we'll just take a couple more here. Now, just to preface this next comment or question with, we had a presentation, half a year ago by a professor, Professor Thomas Zeller. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He wrote a book called Consuming Landscapes. And what his book was about these scenic highways and how when cars first came into vogue and the rich could afford them, a movement started to build these scenic roads. He uses one in Germany and one in the Blue Ridge Parkway in Southeast US as two examples. And then, of course, as you noted in your presentation in the 40s and 50s, well, scenic's great, but we need to move big trucks and so on and so forth. So we need interstate system. But we have a question here from Jim Lewis, who says this was quite an engineering achievement at the time. Can you name other famous projects that we inspired or directly influenced by the building of the Columbia River Highway?
Yeah, I could right off. You know, there were no standards here for engineering standards for grades and curves, and those come along in the teens. Later on, this American Association of State Highway Officials, it's called the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials today, was a group that got together, people from all the state highway departments around the country, with leadership from the Federal Bureau of Public Roads, to develop essentially what we call the Green Book today. It's the design book for roads, and at least the early editions of it. And you know, that's where things got going. But so they set some design standards. But the part about scenic roads, you want the high design standards and scenic. And two of Lancaster's engineers, John Arthur Elliott, who did the Mitchell Point Tunnel, and Frank Kittredge, who was another one, who did work on the Siskiyou Summit portion of the Pacific Highway in Southern Oregon, both ended up in influential positions. And Elliott moved on in the Federal Bureau of Public Roads, and Kittredge went into the Park Service, worked with Stephen T. Mather. And they essentially got together and developed, in my mind, there were others involved too, but I think our highway in some way shaped the lying lightly on the land philosophy of roadway design in national parks. And others might say maybe not as much, but I'm pretty passionate about this and say these two folks were there at the right time in the right place, and they both had the same mentor who was like-minded. And you end up with a program, strategy for roads in national parks. And the first example is going to the Sun Road in Glacier. And you have someone with the Park Service who's an engineer, and someone with the Bureau of Public Roads who's an engineer. Both have the same mentor who's skilled in designing roads to high engineering standards, but sensitive to the landscape. And they develop a protocol that influences roadway design in national parks after that for a long time. So it's pretty cool to think. And then Kittredge had Elliott had a long career at the Bureau of Public Roads. He ended up retiring as like the regional engineer for Texas and that part of the country. And Kittredge ended up as superintendent of Yosemite, and was a high level official with the National Park Service. Mather liked engineers. He liked the way they would think, I believe, and from what I've read. So we had two folks there at the right place at the right time. And that was, I think, is where I can see the most influence that this highway had on other roads. So.
Okay, thanks. We have a question from, that's the last one we're going to take. Perry is asking you to go back to the slides of the tunnel being dug. You skipped to the end, he says, but then I asked Perry, or I texted him to say, did you want to ask a question about that? And he hasn't responded. So I don't know if there is any question there. So I'll just do my wrapping up, Bob. And if Perry does respond to us, then we can take his question. But I just wanted to thank you again, Bob, for a top-notch presentation, both the historic aspects of the highway and the current, what's happening there now. And it's funny, one of the members of our board, Mike Karsten, just was on the road actually a couple of weeks ago. So did you want to say anything about that, Mike, about your trip down the highway? He's on the line. Mike? No, maybe not. And Perry also has no question. So I think
one thing I wanted to say though before we end here is that these state trail projects couldn't happen without partnerships. And you know, and it's not just ODOT going on its own. It's the Oregon Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration's Western Federal Lands Highway Division, their federal lands program, and then Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and then others. You know, but in terms of managing projects and funding and you know, ownership afterwards, and who's going to maintain these, and how do you operate? These are really segments that are park-like, you know, and need the expertise of people who understand parks, and but then there are roadways too, and then the folks who build projects like this. So and then there are many others, but you know, there's a lot of insight there. And then we have a advisory committee, the Historic Columbia River Highway Advisory Committee, made up of private citizens and agency folks, have guided us since the 1980s on all these projects, and their insight has been something else, you know, invaluable. So.
Well, that's quite remarkable of what you've been able to accomplish here. And I wish I had been more cognizant of this when I was in Portland for the SAA conference last year, because I would have maybe rented a car and taken a little spin. But I'm looking forward to going back and getting on my bicycle and doing the trail.
Yeah,
So
well,
that should
we're
be
going to
fun.
have a world-class destination once these last few trail segments are completed. Literally
Yes,
a world-class
absolutely. Well, thanks again, Bob. And I just want to remind our listeners tonight that we, about next month of October, when, and again, note this is different than our usual time because our speaker is speaking to us from the UK. So they're much later in time zone than we are. So the presentation will be on Sunday, not Wednesday, Sunday, October 22nd at the alternate time of 2 p.m. Eastern, when Dr. Kara Rodway, who's the head of research development with the British Library, will talk to us about the American motel sector's evolution from experimental beginnings in the 20s to an established industry in the 1930s. Now, SCA members will be receiving the usual email with the relevant details and the registration link, and others who may not yet be SCA members can register through the SCA's website directly. So thank everybody for spending some time with us tonight. You can, if you're not a member of the SCA, you can expect an email shortly inviting you to join, and we hope you will seriously consider that and enjoy all the benefits of membership. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that the presentation tonight, including the questions and answers, has been recorded, and it will be available on the SCA's website probably tomorrow. Did you want to say any final words, Bob?
Thanks for joining me this evening, and thank you, Brian, for making all the arrangements and making this come off flawlessly. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It was well worth it. So with those words, I will bid everyone good night, and we'll hope to see you on the afternoon of October the 22nd.